Overall, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2 was an improvement on Season 1, but there were some ways this second installment fell short. The Prime Video Lord of the Rings prequel series has been the subject of controversy ever since it was announced, with critical audiences citing a variety of reasons that it doesn't meet the standard of Tolkien's legacy. Still, Rings of Power has, in all, been hugely beneficial for Amazon, and Season 2 solidified the TV show's future. Of course, there are a few lessons Prime Video can learn before approaching Season 3. Many of the valid criticisms of Rings of Power Season 1 revolved around the pacing, character development, and divergences from Tolkien canon. Prime Video seems to have taken this into account in Season 2 since this installment was a vast improvement on all these fronts. Rings of Power Season 2 was full of great content, with a fast-paced story that held the audience's attention from episode to episode. Now, showrunners have the job of reflecting on what went better in Rings of Power Season 2 and what didn't quite stack up to Season 1, allowing the series to, hopefully, perfect its formula going forward. The Rings of Power Season 2 sidelined some major characters. Rings of Power needs to restore its balance. Rings of Power Season 1 introduced a great many characters and balanced the story well between them. This allowed audiences to get to know the players in fairly equal proportions. Galadriel, Halbrand, Nori, the Stranger, Isildur, Elendil, Arondir, Bronwyn, and more all had a chance to be at center stage, and though this vast number of characters contributed to the slower pace of Rings of Power Season 1, these episodes effectively made audiences care about the characters. In an effort to increase pacing, Rings of Power Season 2 backed off on some characters. The episode focused predominantly on Sauron's efforts with Celebrimbor, Nori and the Stranger's adventures in Run, Elendil and Miriel's troubles in Númenor, and Durin's conflict with his father in Khazad-dûm, areas where action was at its peak. Unfortunately, this meant there was little room for characters like Isildur to make an impact. He had some development in Middle-earth, but his story was comparatively forgettable. The Rings of Power doubled down on Galadriel being fooled by villains in Season 2. Galadriel was fooled yet again. Galadriel was a somewhat infuriating character in Rings of Power Season 1. Her reckless focus on finding Sauron meant that she gave almost no thought to the well-being of others, which is rather uncharacteristic of the Galadriel audiences are familiar with in The Lord of the Rings. Of course, this very quality allowed Galadriel to be so easily fooled by Sauron. She had fallen right into his deceptions and made it all worse by keeping the mistake to herself. It was hoped that Rings of Power Season 2 would see a significant change for Galadriel since she would be the wearer of the Elvish Ring of Power, Nenya. While this was the case to an extent, Galadriel was no longer so aggressively eager to achieve her own goals, be damned to everyone else. She still played into the hands of villains. Galadriel attempting to team up with Ardar, only to be betrayed, was a frustrating repeat of her Rings of Power Season 1 arc that contradicted her own development. The Rings of Power needlessly kept the Stranger mystery going in Season 2. The mysteries in Rings of Power Season 2 didn't serve a purpose. The Rings of Power Season 1 depended heavily on the mystery box trope, with a handful of characters whose true identities were kept a secret. This was done to keep audiences guessing who Sauron would be, with the Stranger being a prime candidate. Of course, it was instead revealed that Halbrand was Sauron and that signs surrounding Nori's Stranger were red herrings. It was then heavily implied that the Stranger was Gandalf. Going into Rings of Power Season 2, it was all but guaranteed that the Stranger was Gandalf, but this wasn't officially confirmed until the finale episode. This was a bit frustrating since the mystery no longer served a purpose. The Stranger was used in Rings of Power Season 1 as a distraction from Halbrand's identity. Still, Season 2 did away with any reasonable explanation for why this character's true identity couldn't be confirmed. Rings of Power Season 2 doubled down on its sympathetic orcs. The orcs suddenly didn't want to fight in Rings of Power Season 2. Rings of Power Season 1 took a new approach to orcs. They were still vicious monsters, but it felt as if Prime Video was trying to plant some sympathy for orcs through Ardar. Still, this installment didn't take this sympathy too far. It was understandable that Ardar would care about the well-being of the orcs, but he and his children were still evil and only worthy of marginal sympathetic consideration. Rings of Power Season 2, on the other hand, took the sympathetic angle of the orcs a little too far. This has nothing to do with these episodes featuring orc families and babies. Tolkien canon dictates that orcs reproduced in the same way as elves and men. The problem came when Ardar's chief orc became hurt that his father was sending him to battle because he thought the Moriandor loved him. They had already come that far and had stuck by Ardar's cause for war. Why would an orc suddenly be so sentimental about battle? This idea took Rings of Power Season 1's initial concept a little too far.